I'm okay not succeeding, but I'm not okay not trying. And
Yes.
that's how I define success. I want to take on cool challenges because they matter to me. And if at the end of the day I failed on most of them, I think I'll be okay with it. If I was sitting at home wishing I tried, no, not so much.
From the Grit Institute, this is the Grit Factor podcast. And I'm Shannon Huffman Polson, former Apache helicopter pilot, speaker, and author of The Grit Factor: Courage, Resilience, and Leadership in the most male-dominated organization in the world. I'm also the founder of the Grit Institute, where I help purpose-driven leaders like you build grit and resilience and connect with purpose so that you can navigate transitions, overcome challenges, and lead with impact in your work for a better world. Welcome back to the Grit Factor, where we dive deep into the stories of leaders who have navigated pressure, purpose, and complexity, and emerged with lessons we can all use in our own lives and leadership. Today's guest is Alex Friedman, and I promise you're going to want to lean into this one. I first met Alex over dinner in Seattle with friends, and later on a backcountry ski trip. But his story is wide-ranging. Alex is a leader whose career spans sectors and scale. He's currently the CEO and co-founder of Novata, a pioneering platform that helps private markets advance ESG and impact measurement, putting purpose at the heart of capital. But that's only his latest chapter. He is formerly Chief Financial Officer of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where he helped to steward one of the largest philanthropic organizations in the world. He's also served as CIO of UBS, one of the largest banks globally, overseeing nearly $2.5 trillion in assets. But Alex has also served in the public sector at the highest levels as a White House fellow and assistant to the U.S. Secretary of Defense, and he continues to advise and contribute to policy and thought leadership as a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and founding contributor to Jackson Hole Economics, a platform for candid, clear-eyed economic and social commentary. Alex also sits on the board of directors of Franklin Templeton, one of the most respected global investment firms. Today, we're going to talk about how Alex blends conviction with curiosity and policy fluency with humility. We talk about how purpose can and must be operationalized in leadership, the kind of grit it takes to make principled decisions under pressure, what he's learned across sectors, from government to philanthropy and global finance, and what advice he'd give his 21-year-old self after decades of experience at the nexus of power, money, and mission. This is a conversation about substance, about holding on to values while navigating velocity, and about the courage to build for the long term, even when the short term is screaming. Let's take off. So, Alex, we met through common friends with whom you climbed Denali, and we have shared with our families adventures in the mountains. And you have spent a lot of your time in the mountains, whether it's for work or really in all of your free time. What do the outdoors, what do they mean to you?
Oh gosh. Well, I'm not a very religious person, so I think I find the best connection I can think of to spirituality in the mountains. So whether it's a big mountain in a remote place like Alaska, where you spent so much time, or the Himalayas, or just my local rock climbing crag in the Gunks in upstate New York, I get
Right.
the same miraculous sense of like feeling more in tune with the bigger stuff when I'm out.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's a pretty important piece of, a pretty important piece to find in our lives, wherever it is that we find that, isn't it?
You must be able to relate to that from all of your time in the outdoors.
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. I think there's some quote that maybe it's Dante that says that nature is the second book of God, or that might be a misquote from Dante, but essentially it's another way to understand, how we fit into this bigger thing that's bigger than ourselves. And yeah, that's one of the reasons our family ended up living where we do, for sure.
I feel like the mountains
I love it.
and the ocean, there are these different dimensions. If you think of us as like, I'm just thinking out loud here, it's not practice, but we're these three-dimensional
Yeah.
creatures, but we occupy these three dimensions that are pretty constrained in many ways. They're constrained
Yes.
to kind of our visual field, what we can, you know, get to, and then we easily in normal life, right? And then we sometimes have these transporting experiences through machines like airplanes, and we're up there and, you know, still in three dimensions, but in like a different field view of it.
Yeah.
But if you climbing, maybe like that free diving or even scuba diving, it takes you into these other levels of the three dimensions that are so surreal and special.
So much. I remember that actually, but the first time I scuba dived was on the Great Barrier Reef. And I had was stationed in Korea and took vacation there. And I remember thinking this was literally an entire other dimension is the word that I thought of, a whole new world that was right there that I'd never even known was a part of it. And we do get that if you really spend time, especially if you spend time over several days or go deep, right? Go deep into those places. You get a lot more of a sense of that in a meaningful way.
I'm going to Red Rocks on Wednesday actually for 5-day climbing trip with my best rock climbing friends, and we're going to go try some of these 20 pitch sandstone walls that, you know, gets you like a couple thousand feet up on a wall, and it's just so cool because you're like a little fly up there and you look all around and there's so much space around you.
Oh my God. I'm not sure I got to manage that. I think the fear of heights keeps me a little bit lower. But
Didn't
well
you climb
done.
Denali? Didn't you climb
I did climb Denali, but that's different than being on a wall, right? I mean, the West Buttress route was a little bit different.
Right. The head wall's pretty steep.
Yes. No, that's definitely fall. The head wall was steep, and looking down from the summit is a long way down for sure, but not quite the same thing as climbing 20 pitches straight up. So,
Yeah.
well done.
We may not make it. We'll see.
Oh, I'm sure you will. I'm sure. I look forward to hearing about it. I remember the first time we met, you were a bit of a sandbagger, actually, in a couple of respects. One of which was, you know, I had spent time in the military, and I always assumed in Seattle, we met in Seattle. Most people that you meet in Seattle don't know anything about the military at all. But early on, and you hadn't told me this because you were maybe sandbagging, maybe being modest, that you were a White House fellow for General Krulak. And I know he has remained a good friend of yours. And you've shared stories of being with the general when he went to the mat in support of his points of view about defense
Do you
and
see
spending
that?
and priorities. Ah, right. Look at that.
That's my
Oh,
Marine
that's
Corps
awesome.
values card, except the signature is actually Krulak's because he gave me his because I'm not a Marine, so he had to give me one.
Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. Well, clearly the relationship continues. That love of country. I mean, he's an incredible leader and an incredible human in every regard, and you know that better than most of us. But that commitment to service and that identity of the we and the not me. Share a story of your time as a White House fellow and working with him and how it shaped you.
Oh my gosh, I have so many stories about him. And you have family connection to him too, because Peter's dad, and he spoke when General Krulak called him right after his accident. I remember.
That was thanks to your very generous connection. Yes.
It was an
Yes, that's right.
incredibly easy call to make. I said, "There's a Marine who got hurt, and you need to talk to him." And he said, "Give me his number right now." And once a Marine, always a Marine, right? And
That's
he was
right.
really happy to talk to him. In fact, he called me after saying how much he liked it. But
Oh my gosh, that meant the
gosh,
world to him. That really did.
oh, I have so many stories about him. Let me try to think of one or two that were the most striking. I remember one which was incredible, where I'll tell you two that I think were amazing. So
Yeah.
he would spend 30 to 40% of his time going unannounced to Marine Corps bases all around the world. And you know, as an officer, an accomplished officer from the military, that when a 4-star general and one of the service chiefs goes and shows up, usually there's tons of protocol and right, it's like a big deal.
Yes.
So
Yes.
his whole shtick was like, no one has to know, no one can know I'm coming. And I want to go and I want to see what things are really like. And he called it kicking boxes because he wanted to kick the boxes over and see what was underneath. I followed him around from Okinawa to Pendleton to Paris Island, watching him do this. And I remember at one trip, I wasn't actually on this trip, but I heard about it. He saw some young Marine. The Marine was shocked to see the commandant of the Marine Corps standing in front of him, and he immediately like saluted. General Krulak said, "Well, how's it going?" And he said, "You know, it's great. This Marine loves being a Marine." And he said, "Yeah, great. Well, what isn't great?" And he said, "Everything's great, sir." And he said, "No, something's not great. You got to tell me." And the Marine looked kind of shocked, and he said, "Nothing's perfect in life. Tell me what isn't going well." And the Marine said, after a bit of prodding, he's like, well, my boot is has been leaking, so my sock's always wet, my right boot. And General Kulak said, you've got
Interesting.
to be kidding me. That boot? And he said, yeah. He goes, take that off. Let me look at it. So the Marine took off his boot. He looked at it. Sure enough, the inside was wet. And when he got back to the Pentagon in the Monday meeting of all of his staff, he was telling the story. And he's like, there are Marines out there with wet right boots. And everyone was like, really? He goes, that is ridiculous. How many boots are out in the Marine Corps? And, we were all doing the math. And he's like, this is outrageous. We need to get this fixed immediately. Let me see a report. And so his kind of chief staff went off, did some work, and came back and goes, yeah, sure enough, we got a defect in the right boot of this manufacturer. And he's like, wait a sec. And we started doing some work, and it turned out it wasn't waterproof. The next thing we knew, he was on Capitol Hill getting a supplemental to basically issue, hundreds of thousands of new Gore-Tex boots to the Marine Corps.
Oh my gosh.
And that word got out. And let me tell you, it was very clearly heard from every Marine, which is the commandant of the Marine Corps is walking around trying to figure out what isn't right, and then he's getting it fixed. And there's nothing more tangible to a Marine than a boot that isn't dry. I'll tell you something about the sweep of his family's life, which you may not know. I don't know if you know this. So in World War II, his dad, Victor Krulak, does that name ring a bell?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. Famous Marine, perhaps more famous than even my General Krulak. He was a young lieutenant. In fact, he only got into the Marine Corps because he had a friend of his hit him over the head with a bat so that he got a bump so that he could make the minimum height requirement because he was too short. And
oh my gosh.
when that word got out,
great.
they called him a brute. They're like, that is a brute, because he was so tough to do that. So his nickname was Brute Krulak. And he, among other things, he invented the Higgins boat, which arguably turned the tide on D-Day. And he also brought the helicopter to modern combat. But the reason I bring him up is because in World War II, he was a Marine in the Pacific Theater, and he came across a PT boat of U.S. Navy officers and sailors that had been in an accident, a firefight, and one of the sailors needed first aid, and he was wounded. And Brute Krulak wrapped him in his jacket and did first aid on him. And the young sailor said something like, I'm going to bleed through your coat. Don't put this on me. I'm probably goner anyway. And Victor Krulak said, no way. If you're going to make it, you'll be okay. And the guy said, well, if I live, I'll buy you the best bottle of Scotch whiskey I can find. And, 20 years later or so, Victor Krulak walked into the Oval Office, and Jack Kennedy put down a bottle of Three Feathers, crappy whiskey. And
oh my
they
gosh.
drank it together because it was Jack Kennedy who Victor Krulak had helped save. And Victor Krulak at that point was a 3-star general, and he was, among other things, as I said, he'd helped on all these key things like the Higgins boat and the helicopter. And Jack Kennedy wanted him to be kind of his principal military advisor. This was before the chairman of the Joint Chiefs role, but that was the effective role. And he said to Victor Krulak, Brute Krulak's wife, buy a 4th star for your husband. I want to pin it on his shoulder next Monday in the White House, and we're going to make him my principal military advisor. But first, I got to go to Texas for a campaign stop, of which Jack Kennedy, of course, never came back. And Johnson came in, didn't trust Kennedy's people, and never gave Victor Krulak that 4th star, and instead sent him to Vietnam, which was what Kennedy and Krulak wanted to get the U.S. out of. And Victor Krulak was given charge of the Marines in Vietnam, and the Battle of Hue happened, and he was scapegoated. And in the Battle of Hue, his son, General Krulak, was wounded. Victor was forced to retire after that, never given the 4th star. General Krulak, my guy, he kept rising through the ranks. And in 1996 or so, Bill Clinton called up Victor Krulak's wife, then in their 80s, and said, I heard you bought a 4th star for your husband decades ago. Do you still have that? And she said,
oh my gosh.
And he said, bring it to the Oval Office next week. We're going to pin it on your son. And so in the Oval Office, the 2 80-year-old parents got together with Bill Clinton, and they pinned that old rusty star on General Krulak's shoulders, and he completed that circle.
Oh my gosh, that is an incredible story.
I know.
What an amazing story.
I'll send you an article about it when we get off.
Yeah, please do. And we'll post that in the show notes. That is absolutely That's incredible at every single step of the story. It's the
I
kind of
know.
thing that you think you'd have to invent. Wow, thanks for sharing that. That's amazing. What a special relationship. You had also you had written in your Jackson Hole economics piece, and I know you admitted this kind of early excitement about coming into this White House fellow position, and you interviewed a bunch of senior officers and senior people at the Pentagon, and then wrote this policy paper, and then you had somebody come up and tap on your shoulder, which I think ended up being General Krulak at the time, who decided that he should teach you something about the military. And so you go on in your piece that this is from a couple of years ago, that the internal tensions that surfaced when there was this push for bold modernization within the Corps, this effort that stirs these really incredibly strong reactions both inside and outside of the Marines, right? This is cultural. It has to do with tradition. It has to do with the difficulty of reforming any kind of an organization. Um, Talk a little bit about what your perspective is on those reforms and how challenging it can be within an organization to make those reforms, given those elements of culture, of tradition, of that ownership within the institution.
Yeah, I think you're pointing at
Yeah,
a dynamic that, transcends any one individual example and is pretty common across any organization that's been around for a while and has survived through kind of ups and downs, and therefore
yeah,
has built up a lot of muscle memory about who they are and their culture and all that.
right.
It's difficult when somebody comes in from the outside and wants to change things. It's especially difficult if that person doesn't have a lot of experience, which
Yes.
was my mistake as a 27-year-old, right? I was a White House fellow working for the Secretary of Defense who knew nothing about the military and was sitting there after, spending some time there trying to provide an objective view, which nobody really wanted to hear from someone who had no experience. So I don't blame him at all. I probably never should have written the memo.
Well, that's a standard 27-year-old error, I think. You can be forgiven for that.
Okay, thank you. But more broadly, I just you're pointing at something which is very valid. Change is just
Yeah,
hard, right? It's really hard.
yeah,
People don't like change most of the time, even if it
right.
leads to better end states, and that might be understood intellectually. They don't like it, and I get it, right?
Sure.
We get it. Anyone who's lived into their fourth or fifth decade is comfortable with certain
Yeah.
things, and it's hard to change. My dog today, I was reminded of this. I took him for a walk, and he didn't like the route I picked, even though we live on a farm. He doesn't wear a leash, and all he has to do is
Right.
trot off on these trails. He didn't like the route I was going because it's not the route we usually go, and so he just sat down
Yeah.
and stopped and looked at me, and I had to give in and go the way he wanted to. But it kind of speaks to the broader point of humans and dogs don't really like to do things differently.
Right, right. And you have served in so many different places, right? You've served this White House fellowship, you've served at the biggest philanthropic foundations in the world, multinational companies. And at any one of those places, there's this need to balance core identity and values with modernization, right? And if those are ever when those come into conflict, how do you approach that kind of a conflict?
How I've approached it has not always been a great
Yeah.
approach, to be candid. I mean, what I've usually
Yeah.
tried to do is delineate the issues that I think are holding back the organization from modernizing or becoming more effective,
Sure.
and then um, write a plan for what I think can be done to address what's holding the organization back with specific kind of tactical steps that roll up into more of the strategic change we're looking for.
Sure.
And my theory had always been, look, if everything is presented in clear, easy to understand black and white with, unimpeachable logic, well, then everyone will get it. And it's what you
Sure.
just said. Most people in organizations, even if something is presented that way, they still don't really want to change. What usually you need is
Right.
buy-in from the, most senior leadership. And
Yep.
most senior leaders don't want to deal with their teams fighting. They don't want to deal with big structural change that takes the eye off the ball of what they need to accomplish in the near term because, they're often stuck in the treadmill of needing to show quarterly results as a company or needing to hit targets in any organization that's near term. So it's rare you find the true buy-in to make change unless you are the one running the place. And then, you have to decide, is this how you want to use your political capital, right?
Sure.
Because you only get a couple shots at the bat no matter who you are, whether you're the president of the United States or running a company or a foundation or, a a military unit.
Sure.
So what I guess my big learning was just because you might be right doesn't mean that you're going to induce positive change. You might just
Sure.
blow the whole process up in trying to do it. You need to be very
Interesting.
savvy about how you try to move the agenda forward. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. What are some of those elements of savvy?
Painting a clear picture of the end state, where you want to take things,
Sure.
being clear about what you
Yeah.
think in the current state is holding us back, then
Sure.
um, building kind of enough support at different levels of the organization so that
Yeah.
it doesn't get sabotaged.
Yes.
You can have the right idea, you can explain it clearly, and you can even have the right
Yeah.
senior support. But it's always amazing how organizations find ways to repel change.
Yes.
We've seen that
Yes.
in every place, from government to the military to companies, right?
Sure.
Now, a CEO or a leader can often force it, but what ends up, from my experience, happening is if you force change and you don't have enough buy-in, and it doesn't happen on the timetable you have sold, then
Right.
the critics who want to sabotage it make the voices heard that distracts the leadership, sometimes gets the board or the shareholders or the analyst community convinced that the leader needs to be changed, they were wrong, there are big agendas and
Right.
happening. And you can never
Yes.
get everyone on board, but you need to be savvy about getting the right buy-in, I guess is the way I put it.
That's very sage advice and hard earned, I think, right? Over time, those are the hard lessons for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I want to pivot just a little bit, if it's okay, because you've worked at just a number of incredible, both organizations, but also in incredible positions of leadership. And one of those areas in philanthropy is something that is, I think, often talked about with some disagreement in terms of the way that it can be focused or should be focused. And of course, everybody has an opinion on these sorts of things. But at the Gates Foundation, Gates defined purpose after Microsoft as using wealth to fund charitable endeavors. And then other entrepreneurs that are more in the news maybe lately are creating other models of using wealth to create these game-changing businesses, right? Bezos in space and Musk with space and that kind of thing. Other people than any of those are arguing that there should be more taxation so that there's less that is left to more entrepreneurial ideas. How do you think about purpose and policy relative to the opportunities for doing good with wealth in the world?
A big question. I guess maybe if we start at the high level, policy is at some level designed to drive behavior that maybe from a utilitarian perspective has a net positive for society. And so when the tax code was amended to create the modern foundation, which essentially said, hey, if you have a lot of wealth, you can put it in a tax-free vehicle. We're not going to tax your wealth that goes into this, as long as you give out 5% a year.
Right.
And the reason was, we think it's a good idea to give money out, and that's good for society. And we want to encourage people to do that. And it's okay to not get the taxes today, because over a long time, that's going to produce a lot of net benefit. If you start with that as the kind of first step, I think what you'd ask yourself is, okay, that was a long time ago. I can't remember when that was, from the 30s, maybe, when the modern foundation kind of tax code was created. But you'd ask yourself today, all right, are the assumptions still bearing out? And if so, great. If not, should we change our approach? So the first assumption would be, is it a good thing to allow really wealthy individuals to carve out chunks of their wealth and avoid taxes on it? And if the answer is yes, because we think it's good, then is 5% still the right amount they should give out? Because what 5% is basically saying is, hey, your foundation can exist in perpetuity.
Yes.
Why do we want foundations to exist forever, right? Don't they just create bureaucracies to perpetuate their own existence? We got a lot of problems today. Why don't we have them give out all their money over 10 years or 20 years? Because we know there's going to be rich people in the future. They can then give out their money over the next 10 or 20 years. And we're not going to end up with these foundations like Ford and Rockefeller and others from people who lived a long time ago. Why do we want things to live forever? Those are the kinds of, I think, big questions that need to be wrestled down. I
Sure.
personally believe foundations are good for society. We're the
Yeah.
most philanthropic nation in the world.
Yes.
We also need philanthropy because we don't have the kind of social net structure that, many European countries have.
Right.
Um, until the Trump administration, philanthropy and government worked well together in terms of philanthropy was experimental money to demonstrate kind of social programs that could be scaled. And then government
Yes.
would often come in with the scale resources like USAID or, education department.
Yes.
I think that is under question now.
Yes.
But there's a very valid also point, which is why is 5% the right amount? Because I, when I was CFO at the Gates Foundation, when we did our analysis, we would produce better than 5% returns in the market.
Mm,
Most investment firms do. The 5% was from a time when the growth rate in the US was quite different and the financial markets were quite
right.
different. So arguably that should be higher
Sure.
today, maybe.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. No, that's definitely fair. What do you think about the space exploration opportunity, for lack of a better way to frame it, that some other people are pursuing? And I want to assume that maybe there is some idea that this will be for the betterment of humanity. But let's say it's space, let's say it's something else, pursuing some other opportunity as opposed to going into foundational work, with the idea that you're exploring an idea that may be of benefit in the future. And I don't want to give people too much credit if it's not due there, but
Yeah. I mean, that's no different than any innovation, entrepreneurial activity, right? There's no tax advantages
yeah,
that Bezos or Musk get. So that from a policy perspective, I think it's just pure capitalism. Uh,
sure.
I guess the
Yeah,
difference is they got a lot of money and they're using that money, therefore, to get this going. But they're just acting as their own venture
right.
capital funders as opposed to getting third party money or something. I suppose the negative is, you end up with kind of a Back to the Future scenario. It's a bit like what you saw in the kind of oligarch period in the 19th century in the U.S., where
Right.
success in one area ends up producing horizontal efforts across lots of other businesses. So you produce these big conglomerates,
Sure.
which is how it works in Japan, in zaibatsus and chai balls in Korea and Japan. These big conglomerates. Um,
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm kind of
No,
meandering
that's
now.
fair. That's definitely fair. That's definitely fair. Well, I think it's really interesting I'm just going to keep pushing on this idea of purpose, because you have this fascinating career that goes into the private sector and into the nonprofit sectors, and back and forth a little bit. And when you were at the Gates Foundation, you and Patty were both coming from the private sector, and both, of course, private sector and nonprofits can have very meaningful purpose. But how did that transition, maybe that specific transition and then future transitions, impact how you think about purpose, maybe from your perspective as being part of an organization? And do you think that purpose is easier to discern in a not-for-profit?
That's a really good question. I think any successful organization, a foundation, a company, something in the US military, an NGO, you're
Yeah,
successful if you have a clear mission that everyone understands and can get behind.
sure.
Because, what determines success? It's being able to recruit good people, retain them, and, empower them to execute well. And people
Yeah,
generally respond to missions that they find compelling, whether it's,
sure.
producing a product or maybe saving a life around, health equity, like in the Gates Foundation, or, helping protect their nation, like you've done. Um,
Mhm.
so I guess I start by observing I don't think it matters so much if it's a nonprofit or for profit or government or not. It's kind of, is it
Sure.
a well led effort that has a view of what the mission is that people buy into?
Okay.
Does that resonate with
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, yeah, no, it definitely does. It definitely does. How would you differentiate? This is tricky, and I think there's a lot of the Venn diagram overlaps here, but between mission and purpose.
That's a really good question too. Mission and purpose. Um,
I can tell you, I've thought a little bit that mission is more targeted and that purpose is more directional sometimes, but I'd love to
right.
hear how that plays out for you.
Yeah, that lands.
Yeah.
I mean, I think mission is one of those slightly soft words that could be both a strategic word and a tactical word. Um,
Yes. Sure.
so if it's a tactical word, then purpose is the broader strategic direction. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I was always amazed. General Krulak taught me this. How many people don't know the difference between strategic and tactical? Which
Ah,
in the military, of course,
yes.
is a major problem. Um,
Sure.
I think it's probably true in general use of the words. Mission for me can be either a very broad concept or a very specific concept, depending how the leadership uses the term.
Yeah, there's a guy that's doing some really interesting work right now, and we're interviewing him for another session of this podcast named Scott Barry Kaufman. I don't know if you know his work, but he's worth really looking into. And one of his most recent books is called Transcend, and he looks at Maslow and the hierarchy of needs and how actually this hierarchy of needs is completely misunderstood, that pyramid actually does not exist anywhere in Maslow's work. The hierarchy does, the concept of a hierarchy does, but the pyramid does not, which is important because that really helps to that is the framework that most of us envision and have been taught. And the reason it's so problematic, and this comes back to the question that we're talking about, is that at the top of that pyramid is this self-actualization, that is the goal that we're all working towards. When in fact, the last 2 years of Maslow's life, which was in part prompted by and informed by Viktor Frankl's work, his work was on this something called Theory Z, which was that you actually have to transcend the self in order to find the self. So self-actualization cannot be achieved through aiming for self-actualization, and it has to be
It sounds
achieved
like
by aiming beyond
Siddhartha
it.
and the Buddha approach.
There you go. There you go. So yeah, so relative to that, how does the idea of purpose land for you with that understanding that you have to go beyond the self
Yeah.
to achieve that thing that you're aiming for?
I mean, for me personally, I've always aspired to have my life dedicated to kind of a purpose that resonates. For me, the purpose at a high level was like in the nation's service. That was my university's motto. And I believe that. And, to be candid, I went to work in the White House as my first job thinking it would feel like that. And I joined the Clinton administration right as he was being impeached in 98. And it was just it's a very depressing time to be in the West Wing and the Pentagon. And
Sure.
so I thought, that isn't where I'm finding it. It doesn't feel like where idealistic young people who want to do good go. And I thought that would be the case at the Gates Foundation. The motto, all lives have equal value, really resonated with me. And it was a wonderful period at the beginning. I really enjoyed working with Patty in particular, Patty Stonecipher, who was the CEO. I think I was probably a little young and maybe didn't have enough context, but I did feel it was excessively bureaucratic and kind of full of infighting and politics and all that. Now, it may be that that's just endemic to any organization that's trying to do big things. It has a lot of money floating around and a lot of people. We had a couple thousand people by the end there. But I thought out of that, there's still got to be a better way. And I've tried a bunch of routes. And it's probably what led me to start the company that I have now, which is a public benefit corp, a B Corp. And it's got all these elements around stuff that I feel brings together kind of purpose with a sustainable business model. It's a work in progress for me still, Shannon, how I'd put it.
No, I appreciate that. And I think your career reflects very much that constant motion in that direction. I know you founded Jackson Hole Economics, and that has been this wonderful place to collect a lot of really important thought pieces and ideas. And so talk about what it is that you're doing now and how it is that is an extension of those earlier experiences and how that might be bringing you closer to that purpose for yourself.
If you've been asking yourself, what's the point of all of this? Not just in your job, but in your life, you're not alone. Most high achievers I work with aren't lacking drive. They're lacking direction that actually matters. That's why I built Leading with Purpose at the Grit Institute. It's a step-by-step path to reconnect with what drives you, leads you, and sustains you, especially when things get hard. If you're tired of just checking boxes and you're ready to lead with intention, go to thegritinstitute.com/purpose/ and start Leading with Purpose today.
So I started a company called Novata about 4 years ago. And the basic thing we do is we help small and mid-sized companies around the world measure all of their economic activity to figure out, are they making the world a better place or a worse place with the stuff they do? And that's a really weird way to put it. What we basically do is we help a company measure what until recently you would have called kind of their ESG dynamics. So is
Yes.
your, what is the GHG emissions of all of your work? How does your worker
Yeah.
safety play out? Do you have a cyber breach problem? Do you have a net attrition issue? Do you run a business that treats
Yeah.
its supply chain well? These are the kinds of things that you can think of as risks to the business. You can also think of as kind of
Sure.
producing the externalities that tend to define whether or not business is around for the long haul, whether people want to work with a company. The reason I wanted to do this is because um, I think with a lot of conviction that there's three levers that have moved the world historically. One is religion, one is
Mhm.
government, it's capital. Arguably,
Yeah.
capital is the big lever, in our lifetimes. And
Sure.
most capital flows through private companies, not through small and mid-sized
Right.
companies, not big companies. People often
Right.
don't realize there's about 50,000 public companies in the world, and there's about 300 million private companies. So nine out
Wow.
of 10 people who work in the world work for small private companies. And private companies
Sure.
are the ones that have the least insight into what they're doing to their environment, to their communities. So I thought, wow,
Right.
what if we could help private companies really get their arms around this? It would be like shedding light on Plato's cave. Remember the Plato's cave algorithm?
Sure. Of course. Yes. Very
It's like what's
much.
real, what's not. And
Yeah.
and in order to try to do that, I thought, hey, let's build a business that's actually a technology company. We'll make software that makes it easy for companies to measure all this stuff. We'll then give every company that uses the software access to each other's data on an anonymized
Mhm.
basis so they can benchmark their performance against their peers. And we'll help all these
Great.
private companies in disparate places around the world figure out how they're doing and where they could get better and how to
Yeah.
get better. And we set it up as a public benefit corp and a B Corp. And it's half funded by foundations that had the same
Okay.
view, led by the Ford Foundation, and half by big companies like Microsoft and um, S&P Global and a bunch of other big companies. And today we have about 10,000 companies using the platform in about 25 countries. And
Oh,
we're just coming up on our fourth, we're not even 4 years old yet. So we're really starting to grow. And we produce about 10,000 benchmarks that can measure the most
fabulous.
granular stuff. Like imagine you're a paper and packaging company in the Midwest and you want to know what should my GHG emissions look like if they're going to be top quartile versus bottom quartile compared to my peers. You literally
Sure.
can't get that information anywhere except in this kind of a
Wow.
contributory database. So we're early on, but that's the plan, the goal.
And you said, and I know this is referring to some of the blowback that ESG's received that until recently called ESG. How is the environment shifting around that, and how do you see that impacting both your work but also the broader environment?
Yeah, I mean the culture wars are everywhere on everything. It feels like
Yes.
so it's hard just to carve out ESG as one of the targets these days, but we
Sure.
haven't actually seen the underlying behavior of companies change much. And the reason is because
Yeah.
uh, most investors at pension funds around the world still want to know that investment firms are considering factors um,
Yep.
like those often considered as ESG factors when they make investment decisions. And most supply
Yeah.
chains around the world still require the tracking of these kinds of issues. So imagine you're
Okay.
Walmart. Imagine you're Walmart. Walmart still wants to know that its suppliers don't engage in human trafficking or
Right.
don't have, human slavery issues, right? Are
Sure.
those ESG issues? No, those are Walmart making sure that they can do responsible business, right?
Right. Sure.
Many companies want to know what's their financed emissions. What is their supply
Mm.
chain doing from, a kind of climate perspective? So there's still a huge amount
Right.
of demand to collect all this information. That hasn't
Yeah.
changed. I mean, we've continued to grow quite a bit, even in Q4 of last year and Q1 of this year. So I don't think we're seeing
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
fundamental change.
And so, are you hopeful then for the future, despite the incredible disruption that we're seeing around the world, both economically and politically?
Yeah, I think this is
Yeah.
secular stuff, and we're experiencing
Yeah.
cyclical pain right now. And it doesn't mean it feels
Sure.
any easier. Cyclical stuff is hard, but
Right.
it's the difference between being in a boat that has a current taking you from one place to another and being hit by waves. Like you're gonna be
Yeah.
hit by waves even though you're on a current going from point A to point B.
Sure.
And back to your earlier point,
Sure.
like change is hard.
It is. It's very hard. That's right. I have thought today a lot about various things that we've been involved in getting started or even bringing to fruition, and how that initial piece of inertia, the overcoming of inertia and the friction that is part of the overcoming of that inertia is a really difficult thing to get by. And if you can get past that point, the momentum starts to carry you forward. But there's an initial piece that I think a lot of people just don't push past.
Did you ever see Moana?
Oh yeah, of course.
Remember Moana's trying to get away from the island and over the reef to get under the ocean. And at the beginning, her
That's
boat
right.
gets smashed back by the waves. And then she finally gets a
Yes,
bigger boat with enough speed and she gets to go over that thing, over that wave, that break.
that's right. That's right. Excellent. Thank you for that. That brings me back to reality.
That
My
tells you
kids
I've got
will
a 6-year-old and
appreciate.
we watched Moana yesterday.
Well done. That's great. Well, and speaking of that, how does having a family change how you think about purpose and maybe your purpose in the world?
Oh, that's a great question.
I think people ask that of moms all the time, but not maybe as much of dads.
Imagine me trying to explain that complicated business model I just did to a 6-year-old. Their eyes glaze over after about 3 seconds. They just say, "Are you a fireman? Are you a cowboy?"
That's
And
right.
I'm like, no interest in what you're
Exactly.
doing. I tell my daughter I'm trying to make the planet greener, and she nods with approval on that. So,
That's
uh,
great.
I, I would like my kids to be, think I'm doing work that matters to them. So maybe when they're old enough to
Yeah,
understand it, they'll think this is in that category. I hope so.
sure. Well, what advice will you have for them or would you have for yourself if you were graduating from college today and you know that you want to make an impact, you want to build a career of personal significance, but also with meaning that's part of a greater good? What advice would you give to yourself or to your kids?
Um, I would, I'd say start by experimenting with a lot of things till you figure out what really resonates with you individually,
Sure.
because you'll only
Right.
be great at something if it really interests you. Second, don't listen to other people telling you what's important or not. Often
Mm,
people, they chase the shiny object or title because they think that's where the importance is. That's where the grass is greener. I think is useful advice is find what matters to you and then find ways to do that where you're helping people. And
yeah,
there's a lot of ways you can do that, right? It doesn't mean you have to go work at a nonprofit or you have to work in public service of some kind. Maybe it means you're working at a for-profit company, but you're going to use resources to help others that you gain from that job. Or maybe you're going to use knowledge to help others. Maybe you're going to use
sure.
your free time to help others. If you're a lawyer,
Yes,
maybe it's pro bono work. If you're a doctor, you're volunteering on missions. If you're working at a
sure.
company in marketing, maybe you can help nonprofits that are struggling with marketing challenges in related fields.
Sure.
My own experiences were big mistakes I've made. I've thought, well, that's the way I can have the most impact, as opposed to what really drives me. Um,
Interesting.
do you know
Okay.
the difference? Maybe I'm not clear on
Yeah.
that.
Well, so going for the impact as opposed to what's truly resonant in your heart.
Yeah, and the impact
Yeah.
can be defined by lots of third parties. You know, hey, that's the
Yes.
place you can have the most impact, or people in the White House move the needle the most. You should go work there, or go work at the biggest foundation in the world. That's where they have the most impact. Um, I guess I've kind of come full circle to believe that if you can really spend your time figuring out what matters to you the most, that's the best way to find the most impact you can have.
I remember when I was in my last year of the military and I had applied to business school and I had just been accepted at Tuck and I called my dad and he said, just make sure that whatever decision you make, you're not making out of ego, but you're making because it's the right thing to do. Sounds like that's what you're saying.
It's a great way to put
In
it.
part?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, yeah.
you're much more succinct and to the point.
Well, that was my dad. That was my dad. He was good for that. One other thing I wanted to try on with you is this idea that purpose. I've been thinking of purpose lately as more of this kind of Polaris principle that there are actually three North Stars that make up the North Star that we see, right? And that the North Star over the millennia will be a different star at times because of the way that the Earth moves. And so thinking of these three stars of maybe our connection to what's bigger than ourselves, what you find in nature, for example, or other people might call God, maybe something that is about family or community and something that's really about where it is that your heart feels like it's meant to be, to contribute. How do you think about that in terms of kind of a constellation, essentially, of purpose that might shift over the course of your life?
Wow, that's a deep question. Yeah, what comes to mind is the concept of the three body problem in physics. Do you know
Mm.
about that?
I don't. I was an English major. Sorry.
I'm not a physicist either, so most of what I learned about this came from the three body problem, the book by a brilliant Chinese science fiction author. But the basic concept of the three
Okay.
body problem is if you have a star and you have a planet, then there's a stable orbit around it, right? If you have two stars and a planet, and there are systems
Yes.
where multiple stars, you have an unstable orbit, a chaotic orbit, because depending basically which star is, I guess, closer to the planet gravitational field fluctuates. It's an
Sure.
inherently unsolvable problem in physics, from what I understand. It means you'll always
Interesting.
have instability. I think
Sure.
what you just pointed at, it reminds me of the three body problem because I don't think there ever is stability. You know, you've got pulls from
Yeah.
your family, you've got pulls from your passion or your spiritual quests, and you've got pulls from your work where you might find purpose. And all of
Sure.
them are valid and all of them, pull from each other.
Yeah.
And in a way you have my view is, I guess now, my view now is that if you can accept that it's by definition, chaotic interplay, then you
Sure.
don't have much cognitive dissonance of constantly feeling like, I shouldn't be spending my time on this, I should be doing that. Because we need all three if we're lucky to have enough
Yes.
family and a job that we care about, or a purpose and something that matters to us, like climbing does to me.
Yes.
So I'm going climbing on Wednesday for 5 days. I'm leaving my kids, I'm leaving my job. But man, I need it. So it's really important to
Yeah.
me, right? Worth doing. And I spent the last 5 days um, playing with my kids manically because I know I'm going away, right? And
Sure.
you got to balance it all somehow. It's all chaotic.
Yeah. Right. No, I'm completely with you that the balance does not exist. It's all about how you manage it, right?
As a working
For sure.
mom, I mean, nobody knows better than a working mom, right?
Well, working dad's pretty close, but yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, thank you for this. How my last question for you, and I think you've answered this in some of our previous conversation, but is how you define success.
I guess what comes to mind is going for it.
Yeah.
Uh, I, I'm okay not succeeding, but I'm not okay not trying. And
Yes.
that's how I define success. I want to take on cool challenges because they matter to me. And if at the end of the day I failed on most of them, I think I'll be okay with it. If I was sitting at home wishing I'd tried, no, not so much.
Love that. You know, I picked up a book when we were in Japan recently, and it's called Ganbat. And it's the idea, it's how I think of grit relative to the way that the Japanese might look at it. And really, it's about you keep moving forward. And they interviewed a guy who's 109 years old, I guess, and he still gets up and he lives by himself. And said, what's the secret? And he says, I keep trying every day. I get up and I keep trying every day. I was like, that's a great way that's a grit factor, right?
Totally. And, I failed on so many things now, and some of them have been like big public failures, front page and newspaper type failures. And a lot of them have been just quiet failures, and they're hard, right? But once you get through enough failing, it stops bothering you
Yeah.
as much because you're kind of used to it. And that's a good thing. There's a real silver lining there because you're not as afraid to try new things.
Yes, that's so important. That's so, so important. And actually, a great thing. I'm glad that we got that into this conversation because I think a lot of people need to hear that. It's such a hard thing to experience and it's necessary to your long term success.
Totally. And the last climbing point I can throw in there is that when I first started getting into mountains and climbing stuff, I thought success was getting to the top of a mountain, right? I mean,
Right.
we all did, I guess. Now, for me, success is just getting out with people I like. And I don't care about getting to the top.
Perfect.
I love just moving through the rock and the mountains. Yeah. So different, right? One of the great benefits of age
So
is how that stuff changes.
that's a perfect element of wisdom to bring this to a close. Thank you so much for that. We're coming in for a landing after a wide-ranging conversation with Alex Friedman, one covering values-based leadership, long-range thinking, and building systems that serve people as well as profit. If this episode helped you correct your heading or even recalibrate your internal compass, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It's the simplest way to amplify conversations that matter. And if you're ready to lead with more intention, visit thegritinstitute.com to download your free copy of the Grit Manifesto. It's your pre-flight checklist for a purpose-fueled career. This is the Grit Factor. You're cleared for takeoff.